Hey everyone! In today's video, I'm going to go over the changes and improvements we've brought to the Substream Sync library since our last presentation video. But first, let's quickly go over what are syncs for substreams. Syncs allow us to route data coming from substreams anywhere we want. So it could be used for storing in a MySQL database, MongoDB, Redis, even sending Discord messages. However, sync development is quite repetitive and creates a lot of duplicate code. So with the Substream Sync library, we regrouped all of the duplicate code. It comes with built-in sync commands, generates Prometheus metrics, there's logging, it adds consistency to our sync development process, less boilerplate code required to have something up and running, it's made in TypeScript, and it comes as an easy-to-use NPM package. So now I'll go over the changes and improvements we've brought to the Substream Sync library. First, we did some refactoring, also renamed some of the functions and modules. We also made it more flexible for the user by exposing more of what's going on in the backend. We made some changes on how the command line works by removing required arguments and replaced them with required command line options. We also added environment variable support for all command line options, so instead of having to specify your options values all inside of the command, you can do it through the environment variables or with a .env file. Token generation can now be done using the API key instead of giving the token itself. The user can also specify the URL to use to issue the token with the auth issue URL command line option. There's now an alternative to file cursor with the possibility to give a URL to the cursor path command line option to specify where to fetch and store the cursor content. We also brought changes to the Prometheus metrics by adding more of them like the trace ID and other session-specific data, and made the metrics accessible from the /metrics endpoint. Users can now set custom headers that will be sent to the Substream server using the headers command line option. So this could be useful if you want to have different behaviors depending on what headers are sent by your sync. The sync will now automatically stop instead of hanging if not receiving any messages from the Substream server after a specified amount of seconds using the restart inactivity seconds option. And we also added a health check endpoint to monitor the state of the sync. And finally, we added the list command to see Substream compatible modules. So now I'm going to show you in a quick demo how the text file sync example from the last video that writes Substream's data to a file would look like using the updated Substream Sync library. So to start the demo, we're going to go over the changes that have been made to the text sync code. Then I'll show you the new features of the Substream Sync library. So one of the first changes is that the Substream score package is not needed anymore to create your sync. Now you should be good only by using the Substream Sync library. We also renamed the run function to setup and the CLI module to commander. We also added an HTTP object that contains everything related to the server running in the sync process background. So this server is for the Prometheus metrics and also the health check endpoint. Like mentioned earlier, we do not need the Substream's core dependency anymore, since the Substream Sync library takes care of downloading the Substream SPKG for us. So no more usage of the fetch Substream function. Instead, we have the setup function, which takes the command line options values, returns the substreams, event emitter, the substreams package, the module hash, and the start cursor. But here we will only use the emitter to get the substream data. Next, we get the text file path to write Substream's data to our text file. Then we use the emitter to listen on the any message event type and write to our text file. And while this happens, we also have the HTTP server mentioned before running in the background for our Prometheus metrics and health check endpoint. And finally, for the listening to the Substream server part to happen, we need to start the emitter with the emitter start function. You'll have to also stop your HTTP server to allow the process to stop when the sync is done processing blocks. So that's normally how your sync code would look like using the Substream Sync library. And now we're going to go over some of the cool stuff built in the Substream Sync library. You can now use the list command to see which modules are compatible with the given substream. So here we can see that we could run our sync using the map block stats promout kv out modules. So in our case, we're going to run our sync using the kv out module. And as you can see, this command doesn't have any command line options. The reason why is that I'm using the new Substream Sync feature that allows me to use environment variables to set my options. So here in the .env file, you can see the values being set. And with this command, I'm going to run the sync and use the new cursor path functionality that allows me to write and fetch the cursor from a URL. So for this example, I made a small API that accepts get and put methods to fetch and modify the cursor value stored in a variable in the API scope. And also, as you can see in the .env file, I'm using the auth issue URL and the API key to specify that I want to generate my token using the streaming fast auth endpoint and API key instead of the default values. So once the sync is started, we should see data being written in the text file, and we can access the Prometheus metrics from the /metrics endpoint with the HTTP server. And there's also the /health endpoint that we can check to make sure everything is working fine. So yeah, that's pretty much most of the new Substream Sync functionalities. So the next steps for the Substream Sync library would be to improve the CLI by showing the processing progress and also add more visuals. Also keeping it up to date with the Substream stack evolving. Also possibly integrate OpenTelemetry to the library. And some other improvements, for example, with the logging and other functionalities. And I also want to talk about the new Substream Sync template, which is a GitHub template we created to make the sync creation process even faster. So this template contains the boilerplate code for a working sync project using the Substream Sync library, and you can find it now on the Pinax GitHub. So this wraps it up for the changes and improvements on the Substream Sync library. If you're curious, I strongly encourage you guys to go check our other cool projects on the Pinax GitHub. So thanks for watching and have a good day.